Chapter 23. The Hamiltons were strange, high-strung people, and some of them were tuned too high and they snapped. This happens often in the world. Of all his daughters, Una was Samuel's greatest joy. Even as a little girl, she hungered for learning as a child does for cookies in the late afternoon. Una and her father had a conspiracy about learning. Secret books were borrowed and read, and their secrets communicated privately. Of all the children, Una had the least humor. She met and married an intense dark man, a man whose fingers were stained with chemicals, mostly silver nitrate. He was one of those men who live in poverty so that their lines of questioning may continue. His question was about photography. He believed that the exterior world could be transferred to paper, not in the ghost shadings of black and white, but in the colors the human eye perceives. His name was Anderson, and he had little gift for communication. Like most technicians, he had a terror and a contempt for speculation. The inductive leap was not for him. He dug a step and pulled himself up one single step, the way a man climbs the last shoulder of a mountain. He had great contempt, born of fear, for the Hamiltons, for they all half believed they had wings, and they got some bad falls that way. Anderson never fell, never slipped back, never flew. His steps moved slowly, slowly upward, and in the end, it is said, he found what he wanted, color film. He married Una, perhaps, because she had little humor, and this reassured him. And because her family frightened and embarrassed him, he took her away to the north, and it was black and lost where he went, somewhere on the borders of Oregon. He must have lived a very primitive life with his bottles and papers. Una wrote bleak letters without joy, but also without self-pity. She was well, and she hoped her family was well. Her husband was near to his discovery. And then she died and her body was shipped home. I never knew Una. She was dead before I remember, but George Hamilton told me about it many years later, and his eyes filling with the tears and his voice croaking in the telling. Una was not a beautiful girl like Molly, he said, but she had the loveliest hands and feet. Her ankles were as slender as grass, and she moved like grass. Her fingers were long and nails narrow and shaped like almonds. And Una had lovely skin too, translucent, even glowing. She didn't laugh and play like the rest of us. There was something set apart about her. She always seemed to be listening. When she was reading, her face would be like the face of one listening to music. And when we asked her any question, why, she gave the answer, if she knew it. Not pointed up and full of color and maybes and it might be's the way the rest of us would. We were always full of bull. There was some pure, simple thing in Una, George said. And then they brought her home. Her nails were broken to the quick and her fingers cracked and all worn out, and her poor dear feet. George could not go on for a while, and then he said with the fierceness of a man trying to control himself, her feet were broken and gravel-cut and briar-cut. Her dear feet had not worn shoes for a long time, and her skin was rough as rawhide. We think it was an accident, he said. So many chemicals around. We think it was. But Samuel thought and mourned in the thought that the accident was pain and despair. Una's death struck Samuel like a silent earthquake. He said no brave and reassuring words. He simply sat alone and rocked himself. He felt it was his neglect that had done it. And now his tissue, which had fought joyously against time, gave up a little. His young skin turned old, his clear eyes dulled, and a little stoop came to his great shoulders. Lisa, with her acceptance, could take care of tragedy. She had no real hope this side of heaven. But Samuel had put up a laughing wall against natural laws, and Una's death breached his battlements. He became an old man. His other children were doing well. George was in the insurance business. Will was getting rich. Joe had gone east and was helping to invent a new profession called advertising. Joe's very faults were virtues in this field. He found that he could communicate his material daydreaming, and properly applied, that's all advertising is. Joe was a big man in a new field. The girls were married, all except Desi, and she had a successful dressmaking business in Salinas. Only Tom had never got started.